On the morning of her 35th birthday, Olivia Carter woke up before sunrise. Not because she was excited, not because she expected surprises, but because she had learned long ago that the quieter the house felt, the more dangerous the day might become. The Carter mansion sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean in Malibu. White stone walls, endless glass windows, silence heavy enough to hear your own breath. From the outside, it looked like a life most people would kill for. Inside, it felt like a performance. Olivia slipped out of bed carefully, making sure not to wake Daniel. Daniel Carter, her husband of 12 years, charming, successful, admired by everyone, and completely unaware that the woman sleeping beside him owned $17 billion. $17 billion. Not through him, not because of marriage, not because of inheritance from his side of the family. It was hers. But Daniel believed she had nothing. He believed she came from simple beginnings, that she'd been lucky to marry into the Carter name. And Olivia had let him believe that for 12 years. Because when they first met, she'd wanted to know one thing: if he would love her without the money. Back then, she went by a different last name. Back then, no one knew she was the only daughter of one of the most powerful investment magnates in Asia, a man whose companies quietly controlled tech, infrastructure, and private equity funds across 3 continents. Her father had given her a choice at 23. "You can inherit power," he said, "or you can hide from it." She chose to hide. She moved to the U.S., built a quiet identity, and met Daniel at a charity event where she had been volunteering anonymously. He fell in love with her kindness, her softness, her calm. At least, that's what she believed, until the Carters began treating her like a decorative accessory. Daniel's mother, Margaret Carter, never hid her disdain. From the very beginning, Margaret made one thing clear: "You're lucky my son chose you." Lucky. Olivia smiled through it, through the subtle insults, through the comments about her lack of pedigree, through the way Margaret would introduce her at galas as, "This is Daniel's wife," never Olivia, never with respect. Olivia endured it all for Daniel because she thought love meant patience. But patience has an expiration date, and today, on her birthday, something in the air felt different. She walked downstairs to prepare breakfast. The staff had the day off. Margaret insisted birthdays should be intimate family gatherings, which meant something else entirely. By noon, the house filled with guests: business partners, extended family, socialites. Margaret arrived last, dressed in ivory, as if it were her celebration. She walked straight to Olivia, kissed her cheek lightly, and whispered, "I hope you enjoy your final year as a Carter." Olivia froze. Final year? Before she could respond, Daniel pulled her away to greet investors. The cake was brought out at sunset. 35 candles, everyone singing, phones recording. Margaret stood beside Olivia, smiling. As the singing ended, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. Not a guest, not family, a courier. He handed Olivia a sealed envelope. "In-person service required," he said calmly. The room went silent. Olivia looked down, her name printed in bold: Olivia Carter. She opened it. Divorce papers, filed by Daniel Carter, effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. Daniel looked stunned. "What is this?" he demanded. Margaret's voice cut through the silence like glass. "It's what needed to happen." She turned to the guests. "My son deserves someone of status, not someone who brought nothing into this family." Olivia slowly lifted her eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, she stopped smiling because Margaret had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Daniel stepped toward his mother. "Mom, I didn't file anything." Margaret didn't look worried. "Oh, sweetheart," she said sweetly. "I handled it for you," the guests whispered. Phones kept recording. Olivia folded the papers neatly. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft. "Margaret, are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Margaret laughed. "You have nothing to lose." "Nothing." Olivia looked around the room, at the people who thought she was small, dependent, replaceable. Then she said 4 words that would change everything. "I think you're mistaken." And for the first time, there was no warmth in her eyes. No one in the room realized that the most dangerous person there was the one standing silently with a folded set of divorce papers in her hand. Olivia did not cry. She did not argue. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at Margaret, and Margaret, confident and composed, mistook silence for weakness. "You've embarrassed yourself enough," Margaret continued, her voice light but sharp. "Let's handle this gracefully." Gracefully. The word almost made Olivia smile. Daniel stepped forward, confusion written across his face. "Mom, I didn't authorize any of this. What are you talking about?" Margaret's expression shifted, just slightly. "I spoke to our attorneys. You've been unhappy for years." Daniel blinked. "That doesn't mean I asked for a divorce." The guests exchanged glances. Some were whispering, others were discreetly recording the unfolding disaster. Margaret's smile tightened. "Well, you should have." Olivia finally turned to Daniel. Her gaze wasn't hurt. It wasn't desperate. It was measuring. "Daniel," she asked quietly, "did you know about this?" "No," he said immediately. "I swear to you." She held his stare for several seconds, as if calculating something invisible. Then she nodded once. "Good." Margaret scoffed. "Good? You think this is something you get to approve?" Olivia gently placed the divorce papers on the gift table beside the cake. "You filed on his behalf?" she asked calmly. "I did what was necessary to protect this family." "From me?" Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice but not enough. "You were never one of us. You had no background, no assets, no influence. You married into power." Olivia tilted her head slightly. "Did I?" The air changed. There was something unsettling in the way she said it. Margaret laughed dismissively. "Don't be delusional. If this divorce proceeds, you'll walk away with a settlement generous enough for someone of your circumstances." Circumstances. Daniel looked between them, increasingly uncomfortable. "Mom, stop." But Margaret was on a roll. "You signed a prenuptial agreement, Olivia. Don't forget that." A few guests nodded knowingly. Yes, the prenup. Margaret had insisted on it 12 years ago. What no one knew was that Olivia had insisted on one too, a separate agreement, quietly added by her legal team. Margaret continued speaking, unaware she was stepping onto a landmine. "You have no shares in Carter Holdings, no ownership, no leverage. You'll receive a monthly stipend, and that's it." Olivia's eyes flickered briefly. Carter Holdings. The company Daniel believed he was building into an empire. The company Margaret bragged about at every event. The company that had recently secured a mysterious international investor who purchased 38% of its controlling shares last year. An investor whose identity was hidden behind a private trust. Olivia folded her hands in front of her. "Margaret," she said softly, "who do you think funded Carter Holdings during the recession? Margaret blinked. What? 3 years ago? Olivia continued evenly. When your company was days from collapsing? Who do you think bought your debt? Daniel frowned. That was handled by Vanguard Capital International. Olivia's gaze shifted to him. Yes. Margaret's confidence wavered for the first time. And what about it? Olivia inhaled slowly, then said the words that cracked the foundation of the Carter Empire. I own Vanguard Capital. Silence. Not dramatic silence, not stunned silence. The kind of silence where brains physically stop processing. Margaret laughed first, sharp, disbelieving. That's absurd. Olivia didn't react. Daniel stared at her. That's not possible. Olivia finally reached into her clutch. Not for drama, not for theatrics. For her phone. She tapped once. Within seconds, the massive screen above the fireplace, originally set to display childhood photos for her birthday, flickered. The slideshow stopped, replaced by a financial dashboard. Carter Holdings, majority shareholder, Vanguard Capital International. Ownership structure, primary beneficiary, Olivia Lin Zhao, her maiden name. Margaret's face drained of color. No, she whispered. Daniel looked like someone had pulled oxygen from the room. You, he breathed. You're Vanguard? Olivia looked at him for the first time with something that almost resembled sadness. I was, she corrected. Until 5 minutes ago. She tapped her phone again. The screen updated. Emergency board meeting, effective immediately. Vote initiated. Removal of Margaret Carter as executive chair. Margaret staggered back. You can't. I can. Guests began stepping away from Margaret instinctively. Power has gravity. And it had just shifted. Daniel's voice trembled. How much? Olivia's tone was calm. 17 billion. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Margaret's hands began shaking. That's a lie? Olivia met her eyes. I tried to be part of your family, she said quietly. You chose to humiliate me on my birthday. Margaret's breathing grew shallow. You're bluffing. Olivia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then showed the screen to Daniel. Board vote complete. Result, 87% in favor. Margaret Carter. Removed. Effective immediately. Margaret collapsed into a chair. The queen had just been dethroned, and she never saw it coming. Daniel looked at Olivia like he was seeing her for the first time. Why didn't you tell me? Olivia's expression finally cracked, just slightly. Because I wanted to know if you loved me without it. He swallowed hard. And now? She picked up the divorce papers, smoothed them once. Now, she said softly, we're about to find out who you really are. No one moved. Not the guests. Not Daniel. Not even Margaret. Because in a single moment, the hierarchy everyone believed in had inverted. Daniel had always been the golden heir, the future of Carter Holdings, the face of ambition and legacy. And now, he was standing in his own living room realizing that his wife, the woman he thought he took care of, owned the company that had quietly saved his empire. $17 billion. The number didn't even feel real. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. You're telling me, he said slowly, that for the last 3 years, you've controlled my company? Olivia didn't flinch. I stabilized it. That's not what I asked. No, she replied evenly. You asked who had power, and the answer is I did. Margaret's voice shook with fury. You manipulated us. Olivia turned to her calmly. No, I protected my investment. The distinction was lethal. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger, but humiliation. You let me think I built this. You did build it, she said, with my capital keeping it alive. That's not the same. Her eyes softened slightly. No, Daniel, it's not. For the first time that night, the focus shifted away from the spectacle and onto the marriage, because money was one thing, but betrayal? That cut deeper. Daniel stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. You watched my mother treat you like nothing. Yes. You let her belittle you? Yes. You signed a prenup that left you with almost nothing. Yes. Why? Her answer came without hesitation. Because I wanted to know if you would choose me without knowing what I was worth. He stared at her. And did I? That question hung heavier than any financial revelation. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the guests, the investors who only respected Daniel because they believed in his rising status. How many of these people, she asked quietly, would still be here if you lost everything tomorrow? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not fair, isn't it? Margaret suddenly found her voice again. You trapped him. Olivia turned to her with absolute calm. No, I married him. The room felt smaller now, colder. Daniel shook his head. Why now? Why reveal it like this? Olivia's expression changed. Not to anger, to hurt. I didn't, she said softly. Your mother did. The truth landed. Margaret's attempt to humiliate Olivia had detonated the very foundation she was trying to protect. Daniel looked at his mother. You filed for divorce without telling me? Margaret straightened, still clinging to pride. I was protecting you from being exposed. Exposed to what? He snapped. To her control. Olivia inhaled slowly. You never asked me about control, she said to Daniel. You never asked where the rescue funding came from. You never asked why your board suddenly trusted you again. Exposed to what? He snapped. To her control. Olivia inhaled slowly. You never asked me about control, she said to Daniel. You never asked where the rescue funding came from. You never asked why your board suddenly trusted you again. Daniel swallowed. Because she was right. He hadn't asked. He enjoyed the growth, the praise, the headlines calling him visionary. He never questioned the invisible force stabilizing his rise. And now that invisible force had a face. His wife's. $17 billion worth of leverage. I need air, Daniel muttered, stepping toward the terrace. Olivia didn't stop him. She didn't chase. She didn't plead. For 12 years, she had minimized herself to fit into the Carter world. Tonight, she wasn't shrinking anymore. Margaret slowly stood. You think this makes you superior? She whispered. No, Olivia replied. It makes me finished. With what? With pretending. Margaret's voice trembled. You destroyed my position. You tried to destroy my dignity. The difference was fatal. Daniel returned minutes later, calmer but shaken. The guests were beginning to leave quietly. Investors instinctively distancing themselves from instability. Power attracts, but instability repels. Daniel stopped in front of Olivia. Are you divorcing me? He asked. The simplicity of the question cut through everything. She looked at him for a long time. I didn't file, she said. But you could? Yes. Will you? She stepped closer. For 12 years, I loved you without needing you to know who I was. Her voice didn't tremble. I need to know something now. What? If you had known about the 17 billion, would you have treated me differently? Daniel opened his mouth and then closed it, because honesty was dangerous, and she would know if he lied. The silence gave her the answer. Olivia nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. Margaret watched, powerless for the first time in decades. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. You think I'm that shallow? I think, she said quietly. You grew comfortable being admired. The words landed harder than any accusation. Daniel realized something brutal in that moment. He didn't know whether he loved Olivia or the version of himself he became when standing next to her. And she had known that all along. $17 billion. But the real test wasn't about money. It was about character. And now, for the first time, Daniel was being evaluated, not as a CEO, not as a Carter, but as a husband. The terrace doors closed behind Daniel, but the noise inside his head didn't. For 12 years, he believed he was the provider, the protector, the powerful one. And now he was standing outside his own house, realizing that the woman he loved had been protecting him the entire time. Not from bankruptcy, from humiliation, from irrelevance, from collapse. $17 billion. The number kept echoing in his mind, but it wasn't the money that shook him. It was the fact that she had never used it against him. Not once. Not during arguments. Not when Margaret insulted her. Not when the prenup was signed with humiliating conditions. She could have crushed them all at any moment, but she didn't. And that realization hurt more than the exposure. Inside, the party was dissolving. Investors were leaving. Staff were whispering. Margaret sat frozen, staring at nothing. Olivia stood alone near the fireplace. Not triumphant, not angry, just tired. Daniel stepped back into the room. Everyone watched him. Because now this wasn't about wealth. It was about his decision. He walked straight to his mother. Why? He asked quietly. Margaret's lips trembled. Because she was never one of us. She saved the company. She controlled it. She kept us alive. She deceived you. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, you underestimated her. Margaret looked wounded. I protected you your whole life. And you tried to control my marriage. That sentence felt like the first real boundary he had ever drawn. Margaret's voice dropped. You're choosing her over your family? Daniel looked at Olivia, then back at his mother. She is my family. The words hung heavy. Margaret's composure cracked fully now. You have no idea what kind of woman she is? Daniel inhaled slowly. Yes, he said. I do. He turned and walked to Olivia. The room quieted again. I need to ask you something, he said. She held his gaze. If I had known from the beginning, would you still have married me? Her answer came without delay. No. The honesty hit like cold water. Why? He whispered. Because I wouldn't have known if you loved me or what came with me. Daniel felt something inside him shift. Not pride, not ego. Perspective. For 12 years, she had risked everything emotionally just to test one thing. Whether he would love her when she had nothing to offer but herself. And tonight, his mother had exposed the test, not Olivia, Margaret. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't file for divorce, he said, and I don't want one. Olivia's expression didn't soften. That's not enough anymore. The words were calm, final. You let your mother disrespect me for years. I didn't know how to handle her. You didn't try. Silence. And that was the truth. He had chosen comfort over confrontation, status over boundaries, peace over protection, and she had paid the price. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. For once, she said, choose without knowing what you gain. That was the real test. Not the money, not the company. Him. Daniel turned to the guests still lingering awkwardly, then to the board members watching from a distance, then to his mother. "Effective immediately," he said clearly. "I am resigning as acting CEO of Carter Holdings." Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret stood up abruptly. "Have you lost your mind?" He ignored her. He looked at Olivia. "I don't want to run something I didn't fully build." Her eyes flickered slightly. "And I won't stay in a marriage where my wife feels alone." The investors began murmuring again. This wasn't in any script. This wasn't a power move. It was vulnerability. Margaret's voice rose. "You're throwing away your future." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said calmly. "I'm choosing it." Then he turned back to Olivia. "If you still want a divorce," he said, "it will be because you chose it, not because my mother arranged it." There it was. No pride, no demand, just choice. Olivia studied him. For the first time that night, something in her posture softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. "You're walking away from control," she said. "Yes." "From power?" "Yes." "From leverage?" "Yes." "Even knowing I have $17 billion? He didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." The room felt different now, because power had just shifted again. Not financially, emotionally. Olivia exhaled slowly. "For 12 years," she said quietly, "I wanted to know who you were without my money." She stepped closer. "Now I know." Margaret's voice trembled with rage. "You'll regret this." Daniel didn't look at her. "Maybe," he said calmly, "but it will be my regret." Olivia picked up the divorce papers again. She looked at them, then tore them cleanly in half. The sound was soft, but final. Gasps filled the room once more. "This conversation," she said quietly, "isn't over." She looked at Daniel. "We're not fixed." "I know. You have years to repair." "I know. And I'm not staying because you finally stood up tonight." He nodded. "Then stay because I will keep standing." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, not as billionaire and heir, not as power players, as two people who had almost lost something real. Margaret watched the empire she tried to protect slip through her fingers, not financially, but emotionally, because control only works until someone refuses to be controlled. And tonight, both of them had finally chosen. The party ended without music, without cake, without applause. By midnight, the Carter mansion felt like a museum after closing hours, silent, dim, stripped of performance. But the real fallout began the next morning. At 7 a.m., every major financial outlet ran the same headline. Carter Holdings Board removes Margaret Carter. Acting CEO steps down hours later. Majority stake linked to unknown heiress. The unknown heiress now had a name. Olivia Lin Zhao. $17 billion. The media moved fast. Analysts speculated. Investors panicked. Competitors circled. But inside the house, none of that felt as loud as the silence between husband and wife. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring at the ocean. For the first time in his adult life, he had no title, no board authority, no inherited position, just himself. Olivia walked in quietly. No makeup, no designer gown, just a simple sweater, the woman he originally fell in love with. "I didn't ask you to resign," she said calmly. "I know. You didn't have to." "I did." She studied him carefully. "Why?" Daniel took a long breath. "Because for the first time I realized I didn't know whether I was successful or supported." That honesty mattered. "But you built things?" she said. "Yes, and I'm proud of that. But I let my mother shape my marriage. I let status define my confidence. I let comfort silence me. He turned to face her fully. I don't want to be a man who only looks strong because he stands on someone else's capital. Olivia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked past him and poured coffee slowly. You know what the hardest part of having $17 billion is? She asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. Never knowing who sees you and who sees the number. Her voice didn't break, but it carried years of exhaustion. My father built an empire. I inherited it, but I never knew if anyone who loved me did so freely. She looked at him. When I met you, you didn't know who I was, and you treated me like I mattered. Daniel swallowed. And then? And then you got comfortable being admired. The truth again. Not cruel, just accurate. Outside, Olivia's phone began buzzing nonstop. Board members requesting meetings, crisis managers proposing media strategies, attorneys asking about public statements. Power demanded attention, but she silenced the phone. Right now, she was choosing something else. Daniel, she said carefully, do you love me? Or do you love what I represent? He stepped closer. If I loved what you represent, I would have reacted very differently last night. How? I would have apologized for my mother and asked you to reinstate me. She almost smiled. That would have been strategic? Yes. But you didn't? No. Why? He hesitated. Because this answer required stripping ego completely. Because I don't want to be married to an empire, he said quietly. I want to be married to you. The simplicity of it landed heavier than any financial revelation. Olivia's eyes softened, just slightly. Love without power is easy, she said. Love with imbalance is harder. Daniel nodded. Then let's remove the imbalance. She tilted her head. How? Transfer my remaining Carter shares into a blind trust. Separate from you. Separate from your capital. I'll start something on my own. She stared at him. You'd walk away from generational wealth? Yes. You know you'll be criticized? Yes. You know people will say you married up. They already are. A long silence followed. Not tense, evaluating. Because this wasn't about romance anymore. It was about identity. You understand? She said slowly. That loving me means living in a world far bigger than Carter Holdings. I'm not afraid of your world, he replied. I'm afraid of losing you because I wasn't strong enough to stand in it. That was different, and she felt it. Upstairs, Margaret was packing. The board had already issued a formal statement confirming her removal. Investors were demanding transparency. The power structure had shifted permanently. Margaret paused at the staircase, watching her son and daughter-in-law below. You think she won't control you? She called down bitterly. Olivia didn't turn. Daniel did. She never did, he said calmly. You did. Margaret's face tightened. You'll regret betraying your blood. Daniel's voice didn't waver. I'm not betraying blood. I'm ending manipulation. The door upstairs slammed. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a son. He felt like a man. Olivia looked at him carefully. You're not choosing me because I'm powerful? She asked one last time. No, he said. I'm choosing you, even if you weren't. She stepped closer. And if I lose everything tomorrow? Then we build again. She searched his face for calculation, for ambition, for greed. She found none, only fear and sincerity. $17 billion had tested investors, executives, and enemies. But the real test had always been simple. Would someone stay without needing the money? Olivia exhaled slowly. Then we rebuild this marriage, she said quietly. Not as Carter and Zhao. not as empire and heir, but as equals. Daniel nodded. Yes. Outside, reporters gathered at the gates. Markets fluctuated, analysts speculated. But inside the house, something far more important had shifted. For the first time in 12 years, there were no secrets left between them. And sometimes, that's more powerful than $17 billion. By noon, Olivia's name was everywhere. Secret billionaire wife controls Carter empire. Heiress hides $17 billion fortune from husband. Corporate coup at birthday party. News helicopters hovered near the cliffs. Reporters gathered outside the gates. Social media exploded with theories. Gold digger, mastermind, manipulator, strategic genius. No one knew the truth. And the truth was far less glamorous. Olivia sat in her private office, a room Daniel had never entered before. Not because she hid it, because she never needed to use it. Now every screen in front of her displayed market movement. Carter Holdings stock had dropped 11% overnight. Investors fear instability. And nothing scares markets more than emotional decisions. Daniel walked in quietly. "You don't have to handle this alone," he said. She didn't look away from the screen. "I've handled worse." "I don't doubt that." She finally turned. "Do you know what $17 billion really is?" He shook his head. "It's responsibility. It's pressure. It's thousands of employees whose families depend on decisions made at 2 a.m. Her voice wasn't proud. It was heavy. "My father didn't just build wealth, he built systems, infrastructure, technology funds, medical research grants." She stood up slowly. "I'm not just rich, Daniel. I'm accountable." That word hit him differently. Accountable. He had grown up wealthy. She'd grown up powerful. There was a difference. Outside, Margaret was giving interviews. She stood in front of cameras with perfect posture and wounded dignity. "My son was deceived," she told reporters. "We were infiltrated financially." The narrative was shifting fast. Olivia watched the clip replay on one of her screens. "She's trying to frame you as hostile," Daniel said. "She's trying to survive," Olivia corrected. "Will you respond?" Yes, but not the way anyone expected. Within hours, Olivia scheduled a live press conference. Not from Carter Holdings headquarters, from Vanguard Capital's global office in New York, the building that bore her father's name. Daniel stood beside her backstage. "You don't have to bring me into this," he said quietly. She looked at him carefully. "Do you want to stand with me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." The curtain opened. Flashes exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Olivia stepped to the podium, calm, composed, unshaken. "For 12 years," she began evenly, "I allowed people to underestimate me." The room quieted instantly. Not because I lacked power, but because I valued privacy over recognition. She didn't attack Margaret. She didn't humiliate the Carters. She didn't boast about her fortune. Instead, she did something far more strategic. She announced a $2 billion infrastructure expansion fund tied directly to Carter Holdings, stabilizing the stock overnight, securing investor confidence, protecting employees, and publicly confirming Daniel would not resume his former position. Gasps rippled through the room. But she wasn't done. "Mr. Daniel Carter," she continued calmly, "will be launching an independent venture, fully separate from my holdings." She stepped back slightly. "This marriage is not a merger." The sentence trended worldwide within minutes. After the conference, in the quiet hallway behind the stage, Daniel looked at her differently. Not intimidated, not overshadowed, respectful. "You just saved my company," he said. "Our company," she corrected softly. He smiled faintly. "No, you saved something I almost lost." "And what's that?" "My integrity." For the first time since the birthday disaster, she allowed herself to smile fully. But the final test wasn't the media. It wasn't the market. It wasn't Margaret. It was time. 6 months passed. Daniel launched his own venture, sustainable construction technology. Smaller scale, no inherited board, no family interference. He worked late nights again, but differently. Not chasing validation, building something real. Olivia stepped back from daily operations, appointing an independent executive team at Vanguard. For the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying everything alone. One evening, they sat on the cliff watching the sunset. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet. "Do you regret hiding it?" Daniel asked softly. She thought about it. "No," she said. "If I hadn't, I would never have known who you were." "And now?" She looked at him carefully. "Now I know you're not afraid to be small." He laughed quietly. "I've never felt smaller." "That's not what I mean." She reached for his hand. "You're not afraid to stand without protection." That was the difference. Wealth can protect you from loss, but it can't protect you from truth. $17 billion had tested greed, ego, loyalty, and identity. But in the end, the real fortune wasn't in the accounts. It was in the choice to love without leverage, to stand without control, to stay when leaving would have been easier. And that was something even money couldn't buy.